This presentation is based on work in progress. It is a joint presentation utilizing ICT tools. The presentation includes overviews on research over several decades on the subject of youth-adult partnership approach and its application process in real-life situations, including application of YAP, as it's more commonly known outside the USA, where the approach was conceived. The co-authors of this research are Professor Stephen Krauss, Head of Laboratory for Youth Community Wellbeing Institute of Social Science Studies, University Putra Malaysia, and myself, Eugene Arokiasamy, a postgraduate student at the Institute and also a youth development and international development practitioner for the last 35 years. Let's talk about YAP, or Youth Adult Partnership approach. It's an approach which uses a novel process which engages both youth and adults who work together in mutual benefit to do community actions that focus on social justice and empowerment. It is a practice that has originated in the United States in the 1970s and was really promoted by Dr. Linda Cameo and advanced by Professor Zeldin. It has been researched by many prominent academics in the field of youth development and is now an applied approach which takes into account its applicability in enhancing positive youth development. The co-author of this research paper is Professor Dr. Stephen Krauss, who has worked in the field of advancing youth-adult partnership YAP for the last decade in the United States and outside of the United States, primarily in Southeast Asia. And recently we had the honor, our organization, which has adopted youth-adult partnership in essence in all our work, the Society for the Advancement of Education and Book Donation, International Cooperation Coordinating Committee. Professor Stephen Krauss provided a summative explanation of how YAP works in accordance with policy and practice, and let me now refer to his video clip of our dialogue session.
And I'm going to talk a little bit about the basic concept of what youth-adult partnership is, and we refer to it fondly as YAP. It's easy to say and easy to remember. And so my talk itself is going to be is titled Youth-Adult Partnership and Community Action Models. Youth-adult partnership is an area I've been working in for over 10 years now. We've done a considerable amount of research in Malaysia, as well as with partners from other countries overseas. There's a lot that we've learned, and there's a lot we still need to learn and hope to learn. And so I'm just going to share a bit of that with you tonight. And the main reason for doing this is because of the fact that SAEBD has made a deliberate decision and choice to work from a youth-adult partnership model in pretty much everything that it does. And so in doing so, it's important that people who are interested and hopefully will be more interested are familiar with what youth-adult partnership is, so they're familiar with what SAEBD is really about. So when we talk about youth-adult partnership, before we get into really any kind of definition, it's really important just to know that there's a very strong policy foundation for youth-adult partnership in a more generic sense, which is youth participation. And if we go all the way back to the UN Convention of the Rights of the Child, going back all the way to 1989, we can see that in the convention itself, there's some very strong statements about what young people's ideal role should be in community, and youth-related programs and activities. So, for example, we see here, all youth are capable of expressing a view and have the right to express their views freely. All youth have the right to be heard in all matters affecting them, including programs and policies. All youth have the right to be heard and have their views taken seriously in accordance with their age and maturity. And that's an important point when it comes to youth-adult partnership in terms of how we actually practice it, is that much of it depends on the age and maturity of those involved. The more recent, or actually the most recent, UNDP youth strategy goes even further, and it shows, as you can see there, the first priority of the strategy is to amplify youth voices for the promotion of a peaceful, just, and sustainable world. And that's very much what SAEBD International is all about as well. So there's a very sort of close relationship in terms of the goals there. And in the UN's actual professed strategies, it even mentions quite clearly the need to meaningfully and sustainably engage and partner with young people and their organizations, networks, and movements through formal and informal mechanisms and platforms to realize universal rights-based youth participation. Okay, so this idea of partnering with young people is really what youth-adult partnership is all about. And as we can see from these international policy frameworks, there's actually quite a strong background there. And when we look at specific individual countries' policies even, and I'm taking Malaysia here as an example, although there are many other countries that have very similar goals written into their policies. We can see here from the Malaysian youth policy, the most recent version of 2015, the very first goal, increasing the involvement of youth as responsible citizens in initiatives across the board, at the national, regional, and international levels. And within that youth policy, it even goes into more detail about young people's involvement in boards, in governance, and so forth at all these different levels. Okay, so the policy support and framework for youth-adult partnership is quite clear, even from a global perspective. Now, why YAP? Why this idea of youth and adults working together? Well, one of the problems with youth participation, and this is really a global phenomenon, even though there's a lot of cultural nuances between different countries and the way that different countries sort of culturally work with and deal with young people, there is this sort of universal idea that youth participation really suffers from some limitations. As you can see here, I've sort of taken this from Hart's ladder of participation, which is a very common typology that looks at youth participation in a hierarchical way. And as you can see at the bottom there, the lower three rungs are what many youth programs or supposed youth programs, or programs meant to benefit young people, the way that they're practiced, the way that they're implemented is often at these sort of lower rungs where we have really adult-led programs, adults make the decisions, youth are sort of there as either in a very, at the lowest level, manipulated sort of roles, decoration, they're just there to get numbers, just to report to policymakers that we've done this youth program and 200 young people showed up and that kind of thing. At the highest level of Hart's ladder, I'm not going to go through the whole thing, you can see that the highest level, and this is, of course, a research-driven model. So at the highest level, you see youth-initiated shared decisions with adults. Youth-led activities in which decision-making is shared between youth and adults working as equal partners. And that's even higher than rung 7, which is youth-initiated and directed. In other words, young people do everything themselves. Why would that shared decision-making with adults be sort of higher in terms of the benefits that young people get from this type of arrangement? Well, there's a lot that not only youth get from a youth-adult partnership, but also adults, communities, as well as organizations. And so there's this idea that youth-adult partnership is really about community building. So it goes beyond just the benefits for youth themselves. It really benefits everybody involved. So we know from a growing body of research that meaningful participation for youth helps young people in many ways. And these are just some of the outcomes that we've seen from research across different settings. It helps young people be more open to learning, engaged in critical dialogue, They exercise creativity, take initiative, they become better decision makers. There's a lot here. I'm not going to go through all of them because of the limited time. But especially the one on the left, if you see there, enhancing social competence, problem solving skills, autonomy, and sense of purpose. These are some of the things that we always see in, for example, the media. When we talk about the disengagement problem among young people, they're alienated. They're not involved. They're not capable of problem solving. They're not able to make decisions. All these things that we find quite often in sort of popular writing and so forth. Concerns by employers who are hiring young people. These are the things we always hear. And one of the things that the research has really shown is that youth-adult partnership really does help young people, when it's done well, achieve these types of outcomes, these youth development.
In our research paper, we suggest youth-adult partnership, or YAP, is an approach aimed at building developmental relationships in organizational settings through cooperation and mutual learning between youth and adults. Grounded in the practice of adult support for youth voice and decision-making, YAP is based on the intent of facilitating social justice and positive change in society through community action on programs and initiatives of mutual interest to both youth and adults. Stephen now elaborates on this proposition.
Partnership itself and look at the definition, what it is. YAP is really quite simple and straightforward. It involves people of differing ages working collaboratively over time on matters of importance. And this is an early definition put out by a Dr. Linda Camino, who was a colleague from the US. And there's some really important key words in there. One of the things is that youth-adult partnership is not a very stringent, not a very rigid kind of idea. It's a concept and it's a practice, but it's not a cookie cutter, something that has to be followed like a specific type of program. Youth-adult partnership can happen anywhere, in any type of organization where you have youth and adults. It can happen in schools. It can happen in youth programs outside of schools. It can happen in community organizations. It can happen in NGOs like SAEBD International. It's a concept, and there are certain things that we've found, researchers have found, that contribute to effective youth-adult partnership, and these are some of them. Collaboration, working together over time. So there's time for relationships to build. There's time for young people to learn how to work with adults, for adults how to give young people the space to make decisions, okay? To grow together, the way communities grow together, these types of things. So this is why the definition is sort of broad and it's not so rigid, because it's not a rigid practice. It really isn't. Academics have sort of helped to sort of whittle down the definition of youth-adult partnership, and this has helped us to study it and to measure it and to really understand it in its different practical forms as well. And what we have found is that really youth-adult partnership is comprised of two main constructs. It's really all it is. Youth voice in decision-making, meaningful opportunities for young people to make decisions alongside adults. And this gives young people a sense of shared power, and they become agents of their own development. And coupled with that is the idea of supportive adult relationships, where adults are supportive of young people exercising this voice. Okay, and so it's these two things combined that really make YAP YAP. YAP is, as I mentioned, it's a variety of things. It takes place in volunteer work. It takes place in governance, as you see up on the upper left, the picture on the upper left, steering committees where you have youth and adults sitting together, community panels and so forth. On the bottom, you have youth giving, legislative feedback. You have youth governance structures in different countries. In Malaysia, we have the youth parliament, for example. These are great examples of youth-adult partnership. Advocacy work, community-based advocacy work, young people, and we know that young people are natural activists, and this is often done in this sort of youth-adult partnership mode where young people and adults are working together. So again, YAP is not a cookie cutter. It's not a cookbook. It's a concept and it's a practice. it can happen in many different forms as well within individual organizations. Okay, so as you can see on the slide here, within a particular organization or community, you can have young people and adults partnering in different forms or areas of the work. So, for example, doing trainings together, doing outreach work together. You know, young people doing outreach to other young people, adults doing outreach to other adults, and then sharing and comparing notes on what works, what doesn't work. Organizing and activism, as I just mentioned, is a common manifestation of youth adult partnership. Communication and media. Young people are fantastic at social media, at using social media in ways that are very creative, for example. And there's a lot of examples of what we call reverse mentoring, which I'm going to show in a minute, where young people now are actually training adults on how to be better communicators using social media. Service and philanthropy, we know it happens a lot. Research and evaluation, we have something called youth participatory action research, where young people partner with adult researchers and they engage in co-research together. Okay, and then of course governance and policy making, inviting young people to the table to be actually formal decision makers on different types of governing structures and boards and so forth. So youth adult partnership can take place in any of these working areas of organizations. Again, there's no rule, there's no law that says they have to be doing this, they have to be doing that. It's really whatever works for that organization. And sometimes you need to start in one area so that the concept can kind of build in the rest of the organization. Quickly, I just want to touch on what some of the research has shown, research that we've done both in Malaysia as well as with partners in other countries. One of the studies that we did across 3 countries, Malaysia, Portugal, and the US, and this is nice because we had a sort of a European sample, an Asian sample, and a Northern American sample in this study. And one of the things that we found from this study quickly was that when young people are engaged in YAP at a higher level, what we call full partners, in other words, youth voice and adult support was higher, we found stronger connections, associations with young people's sense of community connection. They felt more connected, more part of, included in the community. They had better relations with people in the community, and they felt more a part of their communities. And they also felt more empowered, which is really important for youth. And in a few minutes, I'm going to show you a video where I have a young person actually saying it and talking about it. And you can see the excitement that empowerment really sparks in young people. We also studied in co-curricular after-school programs. And what we found was that in relation to civic competence, as well as, again, community connectedness, even those after-school programs where there was the practice of youth adult partnership, these outcomes were higher. Okay, so and that's something that is, of course, a lot of adults now they want to see young people involved in sort of civic activities, community-based activities, and so forth. So we found that it did inspire young people to be more involved in these types of activities. And then among Malaysian youth associations, we did another study where we looked at both youth leaders as well as youth participants in these youth associations, which are really youth-driven associations that do a variety of different types of work in communities. And we found that these elements of youth adult partnership also contributed to young people's sense of engagement in both their organizations as well as their communities. Okay, so again, a very important outcome related to young people being more connected to their society and to the adults and communities that they live in, which is a really, I think, important outcome.
Our research paper suggests that we understand cultural context to mean context can be an influencing factor because of the biases that may arise due to interpersonal dynamics and social structures that enforce certain cultural derived attitudes towards tradition, norms, values, religion, race, gender, physical ability, including disability, or sexuality in a social environment. For the purpose of this paper, We have learned from cultural context diversity locally and the influences of multiculturalism in USA, United States of America, and Europe, where the whole notion of multiculturalism, diversity is widely accepted. Insights from Professor Dr. Linda Cameo when interviewing Native Americans in the USA in 2000 indicated particular aspects that are of importance when applying the YAP approach. Such attributes need to be taken into account. And I quote Linda Cameo, in U.S. society, privilege and therefore institutional power is distributed unevenly across gender, socioeconomic, and racial, ethnic lines. Many adults are dealing with their own pain from oppressive conditions, and this can influence significantly the ability to attend fully to roles as collaborators with youth. And by that she means the role of adults. In her 2000 paper, Linda Cameo, in her interview, quotes from a Native American adult the following: "It is a hard thing. Because of history of our people, we are trying to figure out how much of the past to keep and how much to leave behind. 52% of the population of approximately 300 is under 18, but lots of adults are saying, we let the kids do this later," and this is according to research findings. Inclusion is legislatively included in frameworks and guidance for society and social structures in many countries in the West. For instance, we have the US Civil Rights Act. In the UK, you have the Race Relations Act, you have the Gender Specific Women's Act, and these all play an influencing factor. In research work to transpose the YAP approach in Asia, we examine the elements of multiculturalism from a standpoint of acceptance versus tolerance. There are a diverse amount of cultural backgrounds and cultural contexts in the continent of Asia, including Oceania. We have monocultures and we have multicultures. However, one of the influencing factors may also be legislative elements, which see Asia having very few, if none, inclusion legislative frameworks or guidance for social structures or society. The social fact, or as Emil Durkheim has said, the social anomaly may therefore be affected, and this in turn affects social structures and the way societies work. For us as researchers looking at the application of YAP, this in turn also affects the applicability of the YAP approach conceived in the West and its transposition and practice in Asia. However, some research has been done on the application of YAP in Asia. A significant amount of studies have been actually led by Stephen, and the following slide, including his video clips, may give you some insights into its application and the processes that have been adapted accordingly within the cultural context of Asian countries, and also with reference to Africa and United States of America. In this slide, Professor Stephen Krauss provides some examples of YAP in practice within differing cultural contexts. In these case studies, both youth and adults play a role that facilitates mutually beneficial empowerment and agency development.
So getting to the community action models, these are some of the lessons that we have learned from the field. I'm drawing on both some examples here from Malaysia, from overseas, and there are many more. There are many, many more. I'm just going to touch on a few. As you can see here, this is one interesting one that we even have YAP in Nigeria. And in fact, this is from research done by one of my PhD students from Nigeria. And he studied school-based management committees, which are actual community-based, really community-based. I mean, these are in many cases rural communities in Nigeria. And they're practicing youth adult partnership in the form of these school-based management committees, where they have youth in the form of students of the schools, students and teachers, community elders, administrators, all involved, forming these community-based boards called school-based management committees, making decisions together about the policies and direction of their primary schools. And this is a big UN strategy. You can read about school-based management. It happens in a lot of countries. But the idea is to give the local communities more autonomy on how the schools are run. And one of the things that the UN requires is that there's youth participation on these boards. And so my student studied two of these case studies, these SBMs in Nigeria. And what was really interesting is that these are very traditional societies, communities, and you had these very highly respected elders sitting at the same table with students. This is really never before, first time anything like this ever happened. And of course, at first it was difficult. There were a lot of barriers, but again, that the element of time is very important. Over time, with training, and then the adults witnessing what young people can do, really was an eye-opening experience for many of the adults in the community. And they came to realize and appreciate the role that young people played on those boards. When they needed information about something related to the students, they had the experts there at the table. They had the students there. So they would ask the students about, what's going on with your friends? Why are they doing this? How can we help them? So they eventually worked, but it took time. It took time. So that's one really interesting example. Another example is, as I mentioned before, is happening in the corporate world, reverse mentoring. And as we see here, this was reported in one of the Malaysian periodicals quite recently, but it says this training practice reverses the hierarchy of traditional mentoring. So the senior person becomes the primary learner and draws on the experience and knowledge of the junior person, especially in such areas as social media, tech applications, buying and communication styles, and other millennial or even Gen Z business traits. So we have these young people training their seniors in these skill-based areas, which of course young people excel at, right? So reverse mentoring, and I don't have time to really show it, but they even include some of the research findings on reverse mentoring, and apparently the findings are really, really phenomenal. Even the seniors, the older people involved, the adults, really appreciate it and are benefiting tremendously from it. So again, bridging this generational gap, bringing these two generations together, working in collaboration and community. That's what YAP is all about. Clark Street Community School is a very interesting, unique community school in Wisconsin, USA, and one of my core colleagues and partners in our research on YAP is based at University of Wisconsin, Shep Zeldin, and he's done a lot of work at Clark Street Community School, which is a very unique community school model, which is follows a YAP model through and through. So the students do a lot of project-based learning and personalized learning, or they partner with community adults in the community, business leaders, NGO leaders, etc. And they do a lot of their school-based learning, all through projects, and it's all through a community-based, adult-partnered format and approach. From there, the young people are also involved in planning, training, and workshops. They even sometimes deliver training and workshops. It's really quite phenomenal. From there, also, they build community-based coalitions on different issues. So the schooling that these young people are getting is nothing like traditional schooling within the four walls of the school. it's a community school. I mean, it uses the community as the school. Okay, and the students really engage with a network of different adults, both in the school, their teachers, as well as the community. It's all based on this coalition and partnership approach. So it's really a phenomenal model. And again, conceptually, it's youth-adult partnership, it's YAP. How it's practiced and how it looks, of course, is manifested in a very unique way. And they do a lot of advocacy work. In Malaysia, we did a very interesting case study on, as you can see here, traditional youth association as agents of social change, a case study of youth-adult partnership in a Malaysian fishing village. And if you see the slide there, it's a very beautiful slide actually, but this is what this community looks like. It's a fishing community in Sabah, in an island off the coast of Sabah. And the people in this community, it's a big community, over 10,000 people, this is where they live. They actually live on the water. Their houses are on stilts out on the water. This is a traditional Bajau community, which is originally from the Philippines. Historically, they migrated to different parts of Malaysia as well, and Sabah and so forth. And so the youth association on this island does incredible work both within the community as well as with the youth. And using a completely youth-adult partnership model, they involved in leading sports and recreation programs. And the adults are very much part of it. It was led by the youth, and then the youth invited the adults to join in on their different programs. Because on this island, there's a lot of idle youth. There's a lot of young people that don't have anything to do. There's some drug problems. There's just a lot of idle time that's not being used. So the youth association started off by trying to get these young people more involved in healthy activities. So they started mostly with sports and recreation programs, but from there, it grew to become a community education organization. And they started training adults in how to use, Microsoft Word, how to use computers, how, learning languages, religious classes, and so forth. So they began their role grew into community educators. From there, they became advocates for social change on the island. And unfortunately, I don't have time to go into the case study. It's a fascinating case study. If you want to read about it, you can Google it online. You can read our write-up, our articles on it. But it's a really fascinating case study where the youth, the young people, along with the adults, they advocated for the development of infrastructure on the island. And they were successful in doing it. It's a really fascinating case study. And they also were involved in action research to get the government to come and clean up the island, because before that there was all this garbage from the mainland that was going onto the island, and they were accusing the islanders of being dirty, of not taking care of their waste. And the youth association, through a form of action research, actually, they proved that the waste was coming from the mainland and not from them. And once the officials saw this, then they said, okay, fine, we'll go and clean up the island for you. So it was a tremendous example of advocacy through a youth-adult partnership model.
The aim of this research paper is to call for more exploratory research on the role of adults in the youth-adult partnership application processes in the Asia and Oceania cultural context. As stated, the aim of the YAP approach is building development relationships in organizational settings through cooperation and mutual learning between youth and adults. Furthermore, YAP is grounded in the practice of adult support for youth voice in decision making. YAP is based on the intent of facilitating social justice and positive change in society through community action on programs and initiatives of mutual interest to both youth and adults. What next? The objective of our paper is to encourage YAP application research, as mentioned previously. Some YAP research has shown promise in monocultural settings in Asia. However, little research has been done on multicultural settings like those found in Asia. Therefore, we are calling for more research in this field. there should be more cross-national research conducted on the cultural context influences on YAP application and its impact on the practice of youth voice creation through the assistance of adult allies in Asian nations. Why are we so particularly interested in these areas? This is because research would assist with the accumulation of data from further research on influences of culture and cultural dynamics that affect the behavior of youth and adults, and thus the influence of YAP application process. In conclusion, thank you very much for joining me and virtually Professor Stephen Krauss today. Please feel free to contact us at the email addresses below should you need more information or be most willing to collaborate with us in future research in this field of studies. Thank you very much.